They fired him for being just a janitor, but when their $50 million robot broke, everything begins to fall apart. The $50 million robot turned into a killing machine, as the senator's heart monitor let out a final, flatline scream. But when the lead surgeon's frantic roar of "Reset! Reset!" echoed from the theater, no doctor stepped up. In the shadows of the utility closet, a young man in his grease-stained jumpsuit was already moving. He immediately set down his half-eaten sandwich and closed his advanced robotics textbook, because he already knew a secret behind the robot that would either save the senator's life or send them all to prison. In the observation gallery of Sacred Hearts Hospital, at 6:30 p.m. sharp, the Aegis 7 surgical robot with its titanium arms locked in place had systematically frozen mid-operation. And with it, the heart rate of Senator Vance, the city's most powerful man, began its terrifying descent. 30 world-class surgeons were paralyzed in total horror. To them, the machine was a black box of perfection, yet they had no idea why the most advanced technology on Earth had suddenly quit. But on the floor below, standing, was 19-year-old Leo Rossi, the hospital's only night shift janitor in the building, with the courage to wake it up. Leo didn't look like a savior. In his faded blue jumpsuit, the young black man looked like just another part of the cleaning crew, until he opened his mouth and spoke with the authority of a master engineer. With a mix of focused curiosity and quiet tension, Leo pushed through the glass double door. He wasn't just looking at a machine, he was looking at the ghost of his father's past. Still holding his spray bottle and a microfiber cloth, without looking at the panicked shouting of the surgical team, he immediately stepped toward the intercom behind the Aegis 7, his eyes fixed on the robot's cooling vents. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the operating room's overhead speakers, echoing off the sterile tile walls of Sacred Hearts. It was calm, steady, and completely out of place. "You've got a thermal expansion block in the distal arm," Leo's voice rang out from the speakers. "If you try to force a manual override now, the tremor will sever his aorta." The room fell so silent that Leo could hear his own fast breathing. Dr. Sterling, the 62-year-old chief of surgery, froze mid-stride. His hand, still reaching for the robot's emergency override, trembled as the janitor's words hit him like a physical blow. He looked up at the glass gallery, his face slick with sweat. His hands that had performed thousands of surgeries were now trembling against the cold metal of the console. "Who is that?" Sterling barked, his eyes darting around the room. "Get that kid away from the mic. We need the manufacturer's lead engineer on the line now." "The lead engineer is in Zurich, and his plane touched down 10 minutes ago. He's in customs, he won't pick up," Leo replied, checking his cheap $10 digital watch. "And by the time he clears security and finds a signal, Senator Vance will be brain dead. You have 82 seconds before the oxygen deprivation becomes permanent. This is a highly restricted frequency. What are you doing down there?" Dr. Holloway, the hospital's iron-fisted CEO and lead administrator, hissed with her usual venomous authority, rushing out from her office overhead gallery. Her expensive silk scarf fluttered as she leaned over the railing, glaring down at the theater floor. You're the boy who cleans the vents. Are you aware of how much that machine cost? You're a ghost in a jumpsuit. You have no right to even breathe the same air as this equipment, let alone speak to us. Security." Leo didn't back down. While these doctors slept, he had spent 2 years living on minimum wage, reading discarded blueprints in the basement and cleaning every internal gear of this facility after hours. He hadn't just memorized the Aegis 7, he knew it down to the microns. Unaware to Holloway, Leo had prepared for this exact moment. Every cruel insult she had spit at him, every mockery of his status, she thought this was just another hour of his humiliation. She had no idea that the very janitor who cleans her expensive mahogany office table every morning was about to use this chaotic moment to expose her and drag her high-ranking CEO position down to the ground. "The doors aren't restricted anymore, Dr. Holloway," said the young teenager. "The emergency fire protocols triggered when the operating room's temperature hit 90 degrees. Your restricted doors opened themselves to keep the surgeons from baking alive. I'm the one who noticed that the air conditioning in Odal 4 has been vibrating at 60 Hz for 3 hours, Leo continued, his voice the only steady rhythm left in the building. "Dr. Sterling, I believe you're unaware. That vibration caused a microscopic misalignment in the robot's cooling intake. The Aegis 7 isn't broken, it's protecting itself from a friction fire. Move the arm 3 degrees left, manually, and it will reset." "That's insane," Dr. Sterling barked. As the chief of surgery and the son of the hospital's billionaire owner, Sterling had more to lose than anyone if this went wrong. "The manual says never to move the arm during an active lock." "The manual was written for a room at 68 degrees, Leo countered. "This room is currently 74 because your head nurse turned up the heat for the patient's comfort. Physics doesn't care about your manual, doctor." "He's right about the temperature," a young scrub nurse whispered, glancing at the wall thermostat. "Security!" Holloway, the CEO, screamed, her face flushed with rage as she pointed a trembling finger toward the intercom. "I want him escorted out. Now." "Do you have any idea what you're saying? If that machine fails because of your unauthorized interference, this is a multi-million-dollar liability nightmare. This hospital will be sued into the ground." "The real liability, Dr. Holloway, is the fact that you approved a refurbished cooling system for this wing last year just to save $200,000. That is exactly why this room is overheating. If the senator dies," Leo continued, "the investigation won't stop at the robot. It will start with the HVAC receipts I found in your recycling bin. I've seen them, Dr. Holloway. I'm the star witness." A low murmur rippled through the theater as scrub nurses and surgeons traded uneasy glances, their hushed whispers filling the humid air. Even Dr. Sterling paused, shifting a suspicious gaze from the failing heart monitor to cast a long, questioning look up at Holloway. Holloway froze, her mouth agape. She had been ready to order the security team standing right behind her, who had just stormed in via the elevator, to drag Leo out by force. But as Leo's words hung in the humid air, she found herself rooted to the spot. She locked eyes with the guards, searching for a flicker of the loyalty she had bought and paid for, but they didn't move. They remained frozen, staring back at her with a look of pure disgust. In their eyes, she was no longer their untouchable, icy queen. Everyone in that theater knew the truth. If Senator Vance didn't make it, or when the news reached the chairman, billionaire owner of Sacred Heart, a boardroom execution was coming. This wasn't just a surgical failure anymore, it was a criminal countdown. Dr. Sterling looked up at the gallery, his mask still hanging from one ear, his eyes burning with a sudden, sharp realization. "Holloway," he rasped into the mic, "what did he just say?" Holloway's face went a sickly shade of gray as the word hung in the air like a legal execution. The room fell into a terrifying silence, broken only by the rhythmic, slowing beep, beep, of the helpless 45-year-old's failing heart monitor. "With all due respect, Doctor," 35-year-old Dr. Thorne, one of the hospital's elite surgeons, yells out, his voice cracking with panic. "You have to do something now. This is a senator, for God's sake. Look at the monitor." 30 seconds, Leo prompted, his voice echoing with the finality of a ticking clock. With a trembling hand, Dr. Sterling, knowing his father's legacy was on the line, bypassed the digital lock. He gripped the cold steel of the robotic arm. The gallery held its breath. As he nudged it exactly 3 degrees to the left, a soft metallic click echoed through the theater. The status light on the Aegis 7 flipped from a warning red to a steady, functional blue. The robot hummed back to life, its surgical tools resumed their work with precision, and Senator Vance's vitals stabilized instantly. "He's back," Sterling breathed, his shoulders finally dropping as he leaned against the operating table. The room was silent, the air thick with the realization of what had almost happened. Sterling looked up at the gallery, one last time, his eyes locking onto Holloway. The respect was gone. In its place was a cold, surgical fury. "Holloway," Sterling's voice boomed through the intercom speakers in ceiling as he stared her down from the operating floor. "Did I just heard refurbished?" "Dr. Sterling, please," Holloway stammered back over the intercom, her voice cracking. The procurement choices were made to protect the hospital's bottom line. "Save it for my father," Sterling cut her off, stripping her of her CEO authority in front of the entire staff. As the gallery erupted into frantic conversation, Leo was already stepping out. He calmly picked up his yellow mop bucket. He didn't wait for a thank you or a round of applause. "Wait," Holloway called out. Her voice, no longer the iron-fisted CEO, it was desperate. "Who are you? Where did you learn to calculate thermal expansion on the fly?" Leo paused at the heavy double doors, his shadow long against the sterile white floor. "I applied for the biomedical internship here 3 times, Dr. Holloway," Leo said, his voice quiet but carrying through every speaker in the room. "You rejected me because I didn't have a degree from the school you recognized. You told me a boy from the Deep South was genetically built for manual labor. You said it was better for my kind to stick to cleaning. But you never had a problem with me fixing your personal office AC on my breaks, as long as I did it for free. You were happy to take my manual labor then." He looked at the $50 million machine, the Aegis 7, one last time, then at the aged 30 elite medical team standing around the senator like a stunned pit crew. Their tools frozen mid-air. "You spend all your time looking at the scalpels, forgetting to look at the hand holding it." Holloway knew the walls were closing in. Her status, her empire, her life's work, it was all turning to ash in the hands of a boy she used to walk past without a second glance. But an animal is most dangerous when it's cornered. She snapped. Dropping the mask of the elite CEO, she lunged toward Leo right there on the theater floor, her voice dropping to a jagged, terrifying whisper that hissed through the still-active intercom for every surgeon and security guards to hear. You think you've won because you have a notebook and some gossip? Room 412. Your mother isn't just a patient here, she is a guest of my administration. One phone call. That's all it takes to move her to a state-funded facility. You know the ones, where the power fails, the nurses don't check the monitors, and ghosts like her die in the dark. You ruin me today, and I promise you, by midnight, your mother will be breathing through a tube that nobody is watching. The room went deathly silent. The security guards from the gallery began to move, descending toward the floor, but Leo didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face as he looked directly into her bloodshot eyes. I already moved her, Holloway. I used your private security codes to transfer her to a private wing under the senator's protection 10 minutes ago. You're not threatening my mother anymore. You're just confessing to a crime in a room full of federal investigators. I'll finish the vents in the East Wing now. Try not to break anything else. As Leo walked down the hallway, the elite surgeon stood in silence, watching the ghost in the jumpsuit disappear into the shadows. The rhythmic squeak-squeak of his bucket wheels was the only sound left in the prestigious, hallowed halls of Sacred Heart. 19-year-old Leo Rossi was invisible to everyone, but every step was part of a master plan. Just in 2 years as a janitor, helping, performing unauthorized maintenance that gave him access to the hospital's darkest corners. He had been waiting for this exact system freeze, all to fall in place for Senator Vance, the planned obsolescence kill switch the manufacturers hid deep in the code to force a $100 million upgrade to the Aegis 8. Call it a twist of fate, but the very greed Holloway used to build her empire was now the weapon Leo would use to tear it apart. Unknown to everyone at Sacred Heart, Leo had reached the edge of his mission. He wasn't going back to the East Wing. He was heading for the one place the ghost was never supposed to enter. At 8 p.m., after the Aegis miracle, Sacred Heart wasn't celebrating, it was suffocating in panic. Senator Vance regained consciousness in the quiet blue light of the ICU. His first words weren't to his family, or the media vans already circling the hospital gates like vultures. He looked up at the ceiling, his eyes wide and trembling as if he had seen a ghost. In the sudden, heavy silence of the room, he asked in a raspy whisper, "Who was the voice in the ceiling?" 11:30 p.m. In the executive boardroom, Dr. Sterling and Dr. Holloway sat across from a team of black-suited men, the senator's private security and legal counsel. "We've reviewed the surgical logs," the lead investigator said, tossing a folder onto the mahogany table. "The robot suffered a catastrophic failsafe. According to the audio, an unidentified individual directed the bypass. We want a name." Dr. Holloway cleared her throat, her hands shaking as she adjusted her silk scarf. "We believe it was a temporary consultant. We are still verifying the credentials." "Nonsense," Dr. Sterling interrupted, his conscience finally outweighing his fear of Holloway. "It was Leo," he said, his voice firm. "Leo Rossi, a 19-year-old night shift janitor. And if he hadn't spoken up, we'd be planning a state funeral today." The investigators exchanged looks of pure disbelief. "A teenager? You're telling us a member of the cleaning crew navigated a level 5 robotic seizure?" The room went stone silent as the lead investigator slowly closed the surgical log. "Bring him here. Now," the investigator commanded. The search began immediately, but Leo was nowhere to be found. He hadn't clocked out, he had simply vanished. Still invisible. When they checked their HR files, they found a ghost. "Wait." Holloway muttered, her face turned pale as she stared at the computer screen. "This can't be right. His address, it's just a P.O. box." Sterling didn't move toward her. He stood by the filing cabinet, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "His emergency contact is a disconnected landline," he said, his voice cold. "It's like he doesn't exist." Holloway clicked on his digital employee photo, but the file was corrupted. She looked up at Sterling, her eyes searching for an answer, but he was already turning away to the shelves. "Look at this," Sterling said, his voice sharp as he yanked a dusty cardboard box from a shelf labeled, "Rejected Internships, 2021. He slammed it onto a separate table and began digging through it himself. Inside was Leo's application. No Ivy League letters of recommendation. No fancy degrees. Just a stack of hand-drawn schematics. Sterling pulled one out. It was a complete, brilliant redesign of the Aegis 7's cooling manifold, dated 2 years ago. "He didn't just memorize the machine," Sterling whispered, his eyes widening as he read Leo's notes. "He found the flaw years ago. He tried to tell us, and we threw his genius in the trash." Holloway felt a cold pit form in her stomach. At that very moment, she realized they had thrown the solution to their $50 million problem in the garbage. They had treated a brilliant billion-dollar mind like office furniture, only for a twist of fate to put him in total control. If that's the kind of justice you love to see, hit that like button right now. Because what Leo was planning is far more dangerous than they realized. Sterling's hands began to shake as he flipped to the final page of the folder. There, tucked behind the schematics, was a handwritten note that made his blood run cold. "Unbelievable," Sterling said, pointing at the bottom of the file. "Look at the career goals section. There was only one sentence, 'I already know how to fix it.'" "Wait," Sterling whispered, his voice dropping to a terrified breath. "This isn't just a redesign. Look at the date, October 14th. He didn't find the flaw by accident. He's been tracking it since the day the corporation destroyed his family." Sterling pointed to a string of encrypted codes scribbled in the margins, codes that matched the hospital's private security bypasses. "Holloway, this boy didn't come here for a job," Sterling said, looking toward the dark, empty hallway. "He's been inside our system for years. I think he's hunting someone." Sterling stared at the encrypted codes in the margins of Leo's file, his breath hitching in his throat. He looked at the date again. Holloway was still rambling about lawsuits and PR disasters, but Sterling wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at the way the cooling manifold had been redrawn. It wasn't just a fix, it was a map. "Holloway, shut up for a second," Sterling whispered, his eyes darting across the room as if he expected Leo to be standing in the shadows. He didn't wait for the sunrise. As Holloway chased him through the hospital parking lot, her heels clicking frantically against the asphalt, she let out a desperate cry. "Sterling! Wait!" she yelled, waving a stack of legal documents. "We haven't cleared the official statement." But Sterling didn't even look back. He climbed into the black SUV alongside one of the senator's lead investigators and slammed the door. As the car began to pull away, the investigator glanced at him, surprisingly. "You're not waiting for her, Doctor?" the investigator asked. "She'll catch up later," Sterling said coldly, staring straight ahead. "Right now, we have a genius to find. Drive." He grabbed the last known lead, an address that led to the outskirts of town, where the streetlights hummed and the air smelled of rain and old grease. At 2 a.m., they found him. Not in a home, but in a rented garage behind the Silver Star, a 24-hour diner where the neon sign flickered in the dark. "Leo," Sterling called softly, stepping over a pile of copper wiring. As Sterling steps closer, the air in the garage suddenly feels 10 degrees colder, and the blood drains from his face. Inside, the space wasn't an office. It was a graveyard of old ventilators, discarded dialysis pumps, and broken tablets were laid out on workbenches like open bodies, stripped to their cores. Every machine in the room was a piece of hospital trash that Leo had brought back to life. Sterling's eyes locked onto the workbench. This isn't just hospital scrap. It's a circuit panel Leo had salvaged from the trash, but this one has a different name etched into the casing, Project Phoenix, property of the U.S. Department of Defense. In the center of the mess sat Leo, hunched over a circuit board. The blue light of his soldering iron flickered against his goggles, making him look less like a janitor and more like a ghost in his own machine. "Leo," without looking up, "the senator's recovery is at 94% probability. His creatinine levels will spike in 52 minutes. Tell the nurses to adjust his fluids." "How could you possibly know his current levels?" the investigator asked, stunned. "I built a remote patch into the hospital's diagnostic server last year," Leo said, finally setting down the iron. "The server had a lag. I fixed the code so the monitors would be real-time. I've been watching his vitals on my phone." The investigator took a sharp step back, his heel catching on a piece of discarded scrap metal. His face went pale as the implications of Leo's words began to sink in. He wasn't just looking at someone who had gone from a janitor to a mechanic anymore. He was looking at a ghost who had walked through walls that were supposed to be impenetrable. "You hacked a federal-grade medical server?" the investigator whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of terror and disbelief. He looked around the cramped, grease-stained garage, suddenly feeling like he had walked into a lion's den. To the government, what Leo had done wasn't just a feat of intelligence, it was an act of war. Every encryption, every firewall the senator's team relied on for national security had been bypassed by a 19-year-old with a salvaged motherboard and a soldering iron. "I improved it, sir," Leo corrected. He looked at the two men with a chillingly calm expression. "It was crashing every Tuesday at midnight during the backup. I couldn't have that. People sleep on Tuesdays." The silence in the garage was heavy. The investigator looked at Sterling, waiting for him to call the police. But Sterling didn't reach for his phone. He looked at Leo with the eyes of a man who finally understood exactly who he was dealing with. Dr. Sterling stepped forward. He cleared his throat, a dry, nervous sound that echoed against the metal walls, and held out a thick envelope. The board of directors has authorized an immediate appointment, Sterling began, his voice steadier than he felt. Head of Surgical Technology. A six-figure salary, a full lab, and a formal apology signed by every chief of staff. Leo looked at the envelope, then at the wall of broken machines he was fixing for free for the people in his neighborhood. I don't want the lab anymore, he said. Then what do you want? Dr. Holloway asked, leaning against the doorframe and panting from the walk. Name it. Anything. The senator wants to hold a press conference with you at dawn. I want you to hire the people you don't see, Leo replied, his voice regaining that calm, piercing edge. The girl in the laundry who knows the chemical burn rates of every detergent. He paused for a split second, then continued. The guy in the kitchen who noticed the refrigeration seals are leaking. And I want my mother's medical debt cleared. Leo looked Holloway dead in the eye. That is the only price for my silence, if you truly wants to buy it. Keep the fancy titles, Leo said, turning back to his workbench. But if that robot freezes again, don't call the engineers in Zurich. They don't know the sound the gears make when they're thirsty. To understand why Leo was hiding in the basement, you have to understand the legacy and the man he was doing it all for. His father. Thomas Rossi was the lead engineer for the company that built the Aegis 7. 5 years ago, when Leo was only 14, Thomas discovered a fatal flaw in the robot's design. A flaw the company covered up to protect their stock price. They didn't just fire him, they blacklisted him, leading to the family's financial ruin. The betrayal went deeper than just a lost job. When Leo's father fell ill, he was brought to Sacred Heart for treatment, only to be hooked up to the very machine he had warned them about. He died under the shadow of his own invention, leaving Leo with nothing but a broken heart and a blood feud with the corporation. Now, 5 years later, that same machine was about to ruin a senator's life, and Leo was the only one left who knew how to stop history from repeating itself. The stress of the scandal triggered a stroke in Leo's mother, leaving her bedridden. Leo didn't take the janitor job for the paycheck. He took it to watch over the machine that killed his father's career and the mother who was now trapped in room 412. In a cruel twist of fate, the very hospital using the machines that destroyed his father was now profiting off his mother's treatment. They were burying Leo under a mountain of medical debt he could never hope to pay on a janitor's wage. He stayed invisible for years, knowing that the moment he revealed his genius, the corporation that destroyed his family would come back to finish the job. At the garage, Leo didn't take the envelope or say thank you. He simply picked up his jacket, walked out of the garage, and waited for the sunrise. 6 hours later, the invisible janitor was no longer hiding in the shadows of the basement. The boardroom at Sacred Heart was a cathedral of glass and mahogany, designed to make anyone standing in the center feel small. Leo stood in the middle, still wearing his work boots and a faded gray hoodie, surrounded by 12 directors in tailored suits. At the head of the table sat Chairman Sterling Sr., the powerful patriarch of Sacred Heart's Hospital and the father of the surgeon whose career Leo had just saved. The chairman leaned forward, his eyes locked on Leo's. So, he began, his voice echoing through the silent boardroom. You're the voice in the ceiling the senator keeps asking for? Leo didn't shift his weight. He didn't look at the floor. I was not the only one who heard the machine screaming, Chairman, Leo replied. The CEO's office is above the theater, closer than the utility closet where I was having my shift meal. The chairman's expression hardened. Mr. Rossi, we have spent 12 hours reviewing your contributions to this hospital. While we are grateful for the senator's life, we have discovered that you have been, without authorization, reprogramming our servers and practicing what amounts to unlicensed engineering on hospital property. I wasn't practicing, Leo said, his voice calm and piercing. I was fixing, sir. You bypassed federal encryption. Holloway blurted out, her voice high with nerves. You opened the casing on a $50 million robot. If the manufacturer finds out we allowed a custodian to touch the internal circuitry, our warranty is void. We could be sued into bankruptcy. Without asking, Leo walked toward the massive display screen at the front of the room. He pulled a small hand-built device from his pocket, a tangle of wires and a cracked screen, and plugged it directly into the boardroom's port. The screen flickered to life, showing a live thermal map of the hospital's entire east wing. This is your hospital right now, Leo said. The red pulsing in the basement? That's an oxygen line with a hairline fracture near the boiler. It's been leaking for 3 months. Our automated sensors would have caught a leak that large. Yes, your authorized sensors didn't pick it up because they're calibrated for pressure drops, not acoustic vibration. You're looking for a crash, but I'm listening for a whisper. The directors leaned in, the air in the room suddenly cold. And this, Leo swiped the screen, showing the Aegis 7 robot. I didn't just touch the circuitry. I installed a shunt. The manufacturer built that machine to last 5 years so they could sell you the Aegis 8. I modified it to last 20. That is proprietary intellectual property, one director shouted. That is a life-saving tool, Leo countered, his voice dropping an octave. You call my methods unconventional because they don't come with a bill from a corporation. You're more worried about the warranty on the machine than the heartbeat of the person under it. That's why you failed the senator. You followed the contract, but you forgot to follow the physics. The chairman stood up, walking slowly toward Leo. Do you realize that by admitting to these modifications, you are giving us every reason to hand you over to the authorities for tampering with medical equipment? Leo pulled a small worn notebook from his hoodie pocket, the one where he kept his night shift logs. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping right in front of the chairman. Read. Page 42, Leo said. Last February, I reported the oxygen leak. Page 68. June. I reported the thermal expansion flaw in the Aegis 7. Page 110. October. I reported that the backup generators had a 15% failure rate in high humidity. Leo looked at Holloway. Every single one of those reports was signed by me and left on Dr. Holloway's desk. And every single one of them was found in the shredder by the morning crew. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Holloway's face went from pale to ghostly. I don't care about your warranty, Leo continued. And I don't care about your board. But if you want me to leave, I'll leave. But remember that when I walk out that door, I take the invisible map of this building with me. When the oxygen line finally blows or the generators fail during a storm, you won't be able to call Zurich. They won't even know where the pipes are buried. The chairman picked up the notebook. He flipped through the pages, seeing the meticulous, genius-level calculations scrawled on coffee-stained paper. He looked at Holloway, then back at Leo. Dr. Holloway, the chairman said quietly, please leave the room. Your resignation will be on my desk by noon. Holloway opened her mouth to protest. She saw the chairman's expression and fled. As she was escorted out, the 52 years of status Holloway had meticulously built evaporated in a single heartbeat, replaced by the cold realization that she had been outsmarted by the very boy she had called invisible. The chairman turned back to the board. We are not handing this young man over to the authorities. Instead, we are creating a new department, the Office of Systems Integrity. Mr. Rossi, you will lead it. You will have the authority to override any department head on matters of technical safety. Leo shook his head. I told you. I don't want an office. Offices have doors that close. I want to keep my master keys. I want to be able to go where the problems are. The chairman smiled, a genuine, respected smile. Then keep your keys, Leo. But from now on, when you speak, this board will listen as if our lives depend on it. Because clearly, they do. Leo nodded, took his device from the port, and headed for the door. As he reached the exit, he paused. By the way, Chairman, change the filters in the boardroom's vents. There's a mold spore count rising in the ductwork. You'll all have headaches by lunch if you don't. Leo walked out, the heavy doors of the boardroom swinging shut behind him. He didn't head for a new executive suite or call a realtor to spend his new salary. Instead, he headed for the basement. He was going to keep a promise. Inside room 412, Leo sat by his mother's bedside, holding her hand as the debt-cleared notification finally flashed on her monitor. Justice had been served for the years of struggle, but Leo knew that Holloway was just a pawn. The real monsters were still hiding in the shadows, and Project Phoenix was just getting started. Later that night, long after the board of directors had cleared the room, Leo used his master key to enter the hospital's dead storage. This was the graveyard of the hospital, a place where rusted medical equipment was left to be forgotten. Leo pulled a loose brick from the back of a corner pillar, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a cracked, industrial-grade hard drive. He plugged it into his hand-built device. As the files loaded, a video began to play. It was a man in a lab coat, Thomas Rossi. Leo, if you're seeing this, it means I'm gone. I tried to warn them that the hydraulic sensors fail under surgical heat, but the CEO signed the production order anyway. They didn't just fire me, they erased my work. They told the world I was unstable, so no one would believe my findings. I'm leaving the bypass codes in your favorite book, The Principles of Thermodynamics, page 204. Don't use them for revenge, son. Use them for the patient. Because a machine is just a tool, but a life is a miracle. Leo closed the file. He now had the original unredacted engineering logs, proof that the hospital supplier had sold them ticking time bombs for years. He didn't just have a job now. He had the evidence to take down the billion-dollar corporation that had silenced his father. Miles away in a glass skyscraper, a red light began to blink on a security console at Aegis Robotics headquarters. A high-ranking executive was woken by a phone call in the middle of the night. "Sir," a voice whispered, "someone accessed the black files. The ones belonging to the Rossi project." The executive's face hardened. "I thought we took care of the Rossi family 5 years ago. Find out who it is. If it's the kid, don't just fire him this time. Make sure he and that data disappear for good." Back in the hospital basement, Leo looked up at a security camera. He reached up, adjusted his cap, and slowly winked at the lens, before the screen went pitch black. Leo just went from a ghost in the hallways to the most wanted man in the tech world. He has the proof that could take down a billion-dollar empire, but they're already coming for him. What do you think Leo's next move is? Will he leak the files to the press, or is he planning something much bigger to trap the heartbroken CEO? Comment, Part 2. Right now, if you want to see how Leo handles the corporate assassins sent to silence him. Leo Rossi had saved a senator, but he had just started a war with the most dangerous men in the world. A degree proves you passed a test. A result proves you understand the world. Never mistake a title for talent. The people we ignore, the janitors, the mechanics, the cleaners, are often the ones holding the world together. Leo didn't want the money or the fame. He wanted the truth to be told and his father's legacy to be honored. If this story of hidden brilliant genius and justice for a father's forgotten legacy touched your heart, subscribe for more from Twists of Fate to see Leo finish what his father started, if you think genius can come from anywhere. But if you think Leo is the only one hiding a billion-dollar secret in the shadows, you haven't seen the story of the homeless man who walked into a Wall Street firm and fixed a trade that was about to crash the world economy. Click the video on the screen now to see why you should never judge a man by his clothes.